10 controversial things I do to raise a healthy feminine girl. I know there's a lot of ideas out there in the ether about what it means to be a woman and how to raise a strong, independent girl and how a girl should be extra encouraged into STEM and all these different kinds of ideas, and they all have some merit and some kernels of truth. But today, I'm actually going to share the other side of the coin and how I try to protect my daughter from some of the messages that I think are a little bit more damaging to us as girls and women. And it might be a bit controversial for you. You may agree or disagree. Feel free to let me know in the comments below what you think, as long as you do so respectfully, please. And let's get right into it. Hi, I'm Avital. This is Hi Fam. Welcome back. I'm here on a mission to help you to build a strong family culture. That means loving parenting and parenting from love. It means building a family life that is full of meaning and mission for you. And today, I'm going to talk about femininity and what I perceive as healthy femininity and where I see those threats to my daughter as she grows up and what I'm trying to do to counterbalance that. So number one is all about body image. And particularly, I'm talking about influences from the outside world, like TikTok, Instagram, fashion magazines. When I was growing up, I saw a lot of fashion magazines at home, and I still love them. I love the imagery. I love the art direction. I love the creativity. I think fashion is so much fun, and I enjoy it in a very small, tiny way in my own personal life. However, I think those images actually mess me up quite a bit. I think the gaunt, kind of heroin chic, extra thin looks of the 90s definitely infiltrated into my mind and imprinted on me as the ultimate in, the ideal beauty for a woman. And I'm not built like that. I'm more sporty and athletic. And it was always something that I felt like, I should be thinner. And I think I kind of escaped or sidestepped eating disorders by a very small margin. Like, I'm very lucky that I had enough health and stability and community and love and other things in my life that counterbalance that. But many of my friends and my peers, as I'm sure yours, did, suffer and still do suffer from those disorders that can be really deadly. And so I actually do think that those images have a lot of power. They dictate what young girls, very impressionable young girls, think of as how they should look. And it imprints in their mind in a way that is very difficult to overcome. So we don't have fashion magazines in the house. I don't scroll on Instagram, especially not next to my daughter. We don't linger on those images. Now, will she be exposed to them in the future? Sure. But I think later is better, because I think the more childhood you go through without thinking about body image, without comparing yourself to celebrities and models, the better. And I think that those more extreme, almost pornographic images, they're terrible for both men and women. So this is something I do for my boys as well. But they are particularly dangerous, and this is kind of well documented and well proven for girls. So if your daughter is on TikTok following those dances that seem harmless, if she's on Instagram following all sorts of influencers, I just want to plant the seed in your mind to reconsider that exposure. Girls in particular, and this is scientifically, really well documented, there's a lot of evidence to show that they are susceptible to social contagions. So things like anorexia and eating disorders, bulimia, cutting, self-harm, things like gender ideology, things like all sorts of cultish behaviors, those are the types of things that girls are particularly susceptible to, especially in their tweens and teen years, right? So like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old girl is going to be the most vulnerable to these bad ideas that ultimately cause tremendous self-harm. So we try to avoid that altogether in our home. And I will probably be even stricter with my daughter about social media than I am with my sons. I mean, I'm strict with all of them. Ultimately, it's kind of equally, but I would be more concerned about a girl being on YouTube, having a YouTube channel, having a TikTok channel, putting herself out there, putting herself on the interwebs. And I say this as someone who does this for a living, who speaks to a camera and shares it with an audience online for a living. It's tremendously vulnerable to do that. And it would be a terrible mistake to allow a teenage girl to do it, in my opinion. So both to be exposed to the images, but also to be creating the images. So in general, I want my daughter looking at herself less, taking photos of herself less, worrying about what she looks like less. And to that end, I just won't let her engage in any of that online activity whatsoever. Number 2 is I'm conscious about my own projections, about my own body image. So, I think many of us grew up with a mom who maybe wasn't so happy with her body, maybe felt like, oh, I shouldn't be eating this. A mom who was into diet culture or into workout culture, or maybe who didn't take care of herself and never worked out and didn't have the most, fantastic, healthy role model. And it's something worth asking yourself. How did my mom see herself, right? And it's something I am quite proactive about how I want to portray that to my daughter. So even if I have the same insecurities and the same frustrations with myself as every other woman does, I try not to portray those, and I try to silence those voices and to bring out a whole different side of myself, a side of myself that's confident, that loves who I am, that's grateful to my body. My body gave my children their lives. My body carries me. My body is strong. My body is healthy and helps me overcome illness. Those are the types of things, that gratitude and that strength and that well-being. And yes, I enjoy, feminine stuff, dressing nicely, doing my hair, doing my nails, all of that stuff I enjoy with my daughter. I don't demonize femininity at all. We do our nails together. We do makeup. We have fun with that stuff. But I also am careful to show that in a fun, light way, and not as if this is my main identity. I don't want her to think that what I look like is the most important thing to me. I want her to think it's less important than it probably really is. I want her to just not think about it very much at all, right? So, a lot of people think, well, I don't want my child to have bad body image, so I'm going to infuse them with good body image. You're so beautiful. You're so gorgeous. Your body's amazing. You're just the right weight. You're just the right size, and about themselves too. I don't think that's all that much better. I think the better idea is to stay balanced in the middle where, the way you look just isn't the most interesting thing about you at all. Like, whether you look great or not so great is not so important. The more important thing is not to think about yourself, not to have that navel gazing, that obsession, that narcissism, that self-consciousness where you're constantly inhibited and constantly evaluating yourself and measuring yourself at all. So I try not to really talk about my body or about what I look like. Yeah, I get dressed in the morning. I try to look nice, and then I go out and live my day. And if I say anything at all, then it's going to be positive. Like, oh, it's so much fun to go to the beach, rather than, oh gosh, I hope I look okay in this bathing suit, right? I'm just going to be focusing on my abilities and my skills and what I can put out into the world, what I can give into the world, and not what I look like. Number 3, I already hinted at it, is that we celebrate feminine stuff. I am not ashamed or embarrassed or feel lesser than. I don't feel inferior to men. I don't bemoan my biological sex. I don't say how unfair it is that I went through the pregnancies and the labors and that I breastfed. I don't say how unfair it is that, women judged on their looks, or that women are typically the stay-at-home moms if one parent stays home, or that I'm, the primary cook or the primary parent or whatever it is that I'm doing. We happen to have a very egalitarian marriage, but there are things that I do that are traditionally the feminine role. Maybe I care more about cleanliness, or I care more about the food, or, I'm, the one who carried the babies, etc. And I want my daughter to see that I love my gender role. And in fact, if you don't love your gender role yet, I have a video for you to watch just after this one, which is all about how I learned to love my gender role, how I learned to love being a woman. I know it's crazy to say, but I do. I love being a woman, and I want my daughter to see that I'm perfectly happy and grateful for the things that I have and for who I am. And we can indulge and enjoy, the feminine stuff. Like I said, doing our nails or messing around with makeup or having fun with hairstyles or being creative with outfits. I think there's something magical and fun to that girly, sparkly, glittery, pink world. Now, I don't overindulge. I don't want us to become materialistic or consumeristic or, like stereotypically intense about being feminine. Like, we can also just wear jeans and a t-shirt and, work on the treehouse with our drill. Like, it doesn't become our entire identity, but I also don't want to demonize it. I want it to be fun. Like, hey, boys have things that are more boyish that is fun for them. Girls have things that are more girlish that are fun for them. Most of the time, we're pretty much the same. There's more overlap than there is difference. But I don't want her to think that being feminine and, wearing dresses or whatever it is somehow something to be embarrassed by, or something not good, or something that makes you weaker or uncool in any kind of way. Let's move on from the external looks, from all of the accessories and the visuals, the body image, all of that stuff that we typically stay kind of there on the more shallow end, the surface level of being a girl. And let's move into the slightly deeper things that I think sometimes society might be getting a little bit wrong. And I want to make sure that I'm staying focused. So the next thing is that I try to focus on her character development. because society is very obsessed often, and girls kind of take to being very obsessed with what they look like, right? With what things look like externally, I try to keep shifting the focus back for my daughter and my sons to what they are like internally, right? That beauty, beauty on the outside is one thing, but that they need to develop beauty on the inside, that they need to develop, beautiful thoughts and deeds and words and actions and become great people. And it goes far beyond being a girl or a boy, a man or a woman, and just to start to really develop character of a good person who tells the truth, a good person who is brave, a good person who is productive, who is kind, who is strong, who is protective, who is reasonable and logical, who is interesting and intelligent, right? There are so many things to develop on the inside. So her skills, her reading, her thought process, right? Really trying to focus on her character. Is she able to be patient? Is she able to be kind? I think often there's something, how can I put this, a little bit dependent that girls have on their looks, okay? It's kind of like that pretty privilege idea or feminine privilege, right? The idea that, I can get out of certain responsibilities, or I can bend the rules, or people will take pity on me because I'm a cute little girl. And I think that's not a good path to go down. Like, no, you should have standards for yourself. You should develop yourself. You should do the right thing. Being sweet and girly and feminine and weak is not an excuse for any kind of bad behavior. So really, I try to help her to move beyond the external and really focus on the internal. To that end, it's really important to me to teach her to learn to regulate emotions. I think that there is a kind of stereotype about women that tends to sometimes be true, that women are emotionally volatile. Oh, women PMS, women, are unpredictable, women are chaotic in their feelings. And there's been quite a lot of kind of social memes and culture and movies and TV series that almost glamorize that emotional volatility, that almost glamorize being chaotic, being unpredictable, being unstable in a certain regard. And that's something I don't relate to at all. I want to teach her to be responsible and accountable for her emotions, to master her emotions, to master her cognitive biases and fallacies. So if she's catastrophizing, if she's getting really anxious, if she's getting really offended, these are things that I correct. These are things that I constantly coach her through and teach her, because I think it's very, very important. These are the skills that I teach inside of the studio. You can go to highfam.com/studio to get on the wait list. It may not be currently open, but you can check if it is and, try to get in there. I would love to have you on the inside. But this is where I coach you on, say, coaching, right? Teaching kids these mindsets. Not to catastrophize, not to have black and white thinking, not to personalize things, not to minimize or maximize things, not to think that life should just be fair all the time, right? To handle the truth, to be more pragmatic, to be less emotional, to be more reasonable and logical. And this is particularly necessary, I think, for girls, where society is going to say, hormones, just being a woman, that's just what being a woman is. No, that's not just what being a woman is. We women are grown adults. We can handle ourselves. We can handle our feelings. We can, master our volatility. And I think that it doesn't serve her best interest to kind of agitate, encourage, or even just enable that. Like, no, I hold you to the standard that you're going to learn to overcome your emotions. They aren't going to run you. I know too many grown women whose emotions run their lives. They feel like they're constantly in whiplash, constantly in a state of distress, constantly reactive to what's going on around them, and they're never feeling like calm, grounded, in control. That's something that I want for my daughter. And that is why I don't reward emotionality. I don't reward tantrums. I don't reward emotional volatility, screaming, getting insulted, etc. Those things actually will not get her what she wants. What will get her what she wants is talking politely, is calming herself down, is apologizing, is taking responsibility, is being in control of her feelings. I told you they're countercultural and controversial. I warned you. Okay, the next one is to teach her to face her fears and to overcome anxiety. This is another form of emotional mastery, but specifically when it comes to being anxious. Look, young girls who become tweens and then teens are going to experience a spike in negative emotion, okay, in neuroticism, in being highly critical of themselves, of others, in being inhibited, feeling self-conscious, in doubts, in anxieties. And that is something that our culture hasn't quite mastered. In fact, I think we start to encourage it in them, right? Like somehow rewarding them with, okay, so you don't have to try. Okay, so you don't have to come to school. Okay, so don't worry. You don't need to apply yourself. But I think it's important to teach young girls and, even really young girls, but especially tweens and teens, that they are expected and are able. That's the key thing. They are able to overcome their anxieties, to master themselves, to be effective in the world, to be competent, to be productive, and to hold themselves to a standard. Every time we just let them off the hook, every time we're protective of them, every time we step in to save them, every time we make them, dependent on us, we're making them small and fragile. That's not what I want for my daughter. I want her to be able to withstand stresses and pain and frustration and difficulties and the suffering that is embedded into life. And therefore, I don't save her from everything. I don't over-empathize, right? Remember, if you saw my video about controversial things I do to raise masculine boys, I spoke about toxic empathy. And this toxic empathy is this idea of bending over backwards to overprotect our children, to over-associate and over-attach to every emotion they have. Oh, you poor thing, you have a tummy ache. Oh, she was so mean to you. Oh, let me call the teacher, right? Kind of stepping in to save them all the time, massaging and egging on this anxiety or this complaints or these negative emotions. And I think that's not wise. I think what's better is to coach her to master them herself, to say, yep, that's normal. Everybody has those feelings sometimes. Let's think what we can do about it. Okay, what are your next steps? Call her to action, right? Call her to accountability. So I'll give you an example from my own daughter's life, which is she was very, very afraid of dogs. And I think that if I was in that toxic kind of empathic mindset, then I would have said, okay, don't worry, sweetie, here, you can hide behind me. I'll stroke the dog. You never need to be exposed to dogs again. And the problem is that it reinforces the phobia. It reinforces the fear. It actually sets it into her character in a way that becomes a rut and becomes very hard to change in the future. And so instead, I said, listen, sweetie, we're going to babysit our friend's dog. She's a beautiful, sweet, gentle Labradoodle. You're going to enjoy her. You will overcome your fear. We'll do it together. Okay? Okay. And she voluntarily faced her fears along with me. And slowly, she overcame them to the point that we now have a dog and she loves the dog and she can walk the dog and she's not afraid of the dog and she's overcome her fears. And that is just such a key narrative, right? That there's such a power to that narrative in her childhood that I had a big fear, but I faced it and I overcame it. Kids and girls especially need to voluntarily face their anxieties so that they overcome them rather than attaching to them and making that their identity. Like, oh, I'm just afraid of everything. I do know this one girl who has made it her entire identity. Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared of the dark. I'm scared of riding my bike. I'm scared of going out by myself, right? And that's something I relate to as someone who has clinical PTSD. I'm scared of a lot of things. I have panic attacks about a lot of things, but I absolutely demand of myself to overcome that, to face my fears, to function, right? And not to avoid the things I'm afraid of, because I refuse to live a fragile, timid, hidden life. And that's something that I want my child to learn early on. The next one is to try to teach her not to be too consumerist, to teach her not to waste money. I think there's a subconscious awareness of teaching boys about finances that isn't quite there for girls in the same way. So we tend to maybe just leftovers from previous generations, or maybe from our generation too, consider men to be the more financially savvy, or to be the providers, or to be more responsible and aware, and to need to save and to earn. And I think that I don't think this research showed this quite clearly, that parents tend to teach their sons to save and their daughters to spend. And that's something that I am trying to counterbalance, right? To teach my daughter to earn money, to work for money, to save money, to be conscientious about spending, right? This is actually the source of a tremendous amount of stress for couples, where there's a big difference between the man and the woman, where he's going to be more likely in most scenarios, again, not all at all, but in many scenarios, he's going to be more likely to be financially anxious and conservative and saving, and she's going to be more of the spender. And that causes tremendous tension. And I think it would be better for us all to kind of come towards the middle, where we both are conscious of saving and we're both also aware that you got to live life and enjoy sometimes spending. But the thing is that with little girls in particular, there's something about consumerism, right? They get very attached to trends and to fads, and they need the latest thing, and they need to update their wardrobe, and they need more shoes, and they want more toys. And, it's not enough to just have one doll. You need all the dolls, and then you need to collect more, and then you need to, and it's something that I think is hard. It's kind of like a tsunami that's hard to stop, but it's something that I think our daughters really need, is to learn to be conscientious spenders, to understand the value of a dollar, to understand that hard work goes into that, and to be careful about how they spend their money. The next thing I try to teach my daughter is to apologize, to take responsibility and accountability for her behaviors. Again, there's something in kind of culture and movies and stories where you often see women kind of evading responsibility, where they don't actually ever forthrightly say, I'm sorry I did XYZ, I'm sorry I was wrong. The ability to admit wrongdoing or being wrong about something is something that seems to be incredibly challenging. And I know that in my marriage, I find it quite challenging to apologize properly. In my parenting, I find it quite challenging. That's something that I've worked on, and it's become second nature to me over the years. But it's something I want my daughter to see, is that I apologized to my husband when I was maybe wrong or disrespectful or undermining him or being rude. I apologize to my children when I've yelled, when I was out of line, when I didn't fulfill a promise. And I want her to see that to be a real woman, you need to be able to take responsibility for your actions. The next thing I teach my daughter is that biology is not destiny. So it's true that women and men are different. And it's true that if she wants to have children in the future, it's going to be her who carries them and hopefully breastfeeds them and gives birth to them, etc. And that, that is destiny in some form or other, right? That does actually influence her life in a very, very big way. But it's also true that there aren't any real glass ceilings anymore for women in, free societies. In free societies, if you want to, you could become the prime minister, you could become the CEO, you could start your own company, you could be a professor, you could be an engineer, you could work on an oil rig. There are women who do absolutely everything. And so she should know that those options are available to her. But with that comes the next point, which is that there's nothing wrong with being a traditional woman, right? There's nothing wrong with going into traditionally female or feminine careers, like being a teacher or caregiving careers, right? You can debate the merit of these careers based on their lifestyle and their earning potential and the meaning behind them. That's all fine. But in terms of gender, I want her to know these two things. On the one hand, she's not limited. She could do whatever she wants if she applies herself and works hard, just like everyone else. And on the other hand, it's okay not to be in the power suit in the C-suite, climbing the corporate ladder or being the CEO or going into STEM. In the countries that are the most egalitarian, where there's the most equality, where there's the most, push for girls to go into STEM, for example, so that they can even out, the numbers, what they find is that women are even more inclined into typically feminine careers, like being in the healthcare, being in teaching, being in caregiving, being in creative positions. And that's because there is a genuine biological difference on average, not in every individual, but on average between the sexes. And that's okay. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I don't want her to think that that's not okay. So it's okay to climb and to have a kind of typically male career. And it's also okay to be a stay-at-home mom if you can afford that, or to be in a typically female career. And I think the whole point of, true kind of first, second, and third wave feminism was to open up that choice, right? To open up that option for women, and they have the choice, but it needs to be a choice that's truly a choice, that she's not pushed in to becoming, a mathematics professor just because there aren't enough women in that field. But if she wants to be a mathematics professor, go right ahead. The final point that I really try to model and teach my daughter, controversial, countercultural, to be a healthy, feminine adult woman, is not to badmouth men. This has become one of the main pastimes and sports of women. I don't know when this began, but the battle of the sexes is just uncool, you guys. I just find it such a waste of time and so counterproductive, and also just not true. The sexes are more complementary than they are in competition. We collaborate, we build things together, we can harmonize, complete each other, help each other, we're all one species. And it's just really strange for me that grown adult women spend time bad-mouthing men. Especially weird if you're married to one, if you're raising one, if you're the daughter of one, if you're the sister of one. Aren't there men in your life that you love, that you cherish, that you respect? Why are you grouping them all together as one, conglomerate and treating them like some kind of negative, toxic monolith? I'm not into that. And I teach my daughter that we don't generalize about all sorts of groups. I tell her not to generalize about people because of their skin color or their religion or where they came from or their sex. Like, we don't generalize about people in any other context. And I don't want her to generalize about men in general in a bad way, I mean, right? Like being, just unkind, I think it is, about maleness. Right? Now, we all make jokes here and there, and I definitely want my kids to know how to take a joke and to handle a joke. It's all fine. And things that I just said in generally, stereotypical ways, just like I've said now about girls and women throughout this whole video, that's also fine. But the bad mouthing, the husband bashing, these ideas that do kind of, percolate in the feminist culture wars are ideas like, women need men like a fish need a bicycle. In other words, men are useless. Men are redundant. We don't need them anymore, right? Or ideas that paint men in some kind of bad or aggressive way. Again, I like to point out to her just how much I love her father, just how much I love her brothers, my father, and how much we need and cherish men in our lives, just like they need and cherish women in theirs. Overall, the most important message I think that our children need to get, whether it's boys or girls, is not to think of themselves, in such a positive way, not to have this amazing self-esteem and high, positive self-image, but rather to just think of themselves less in general. Not to think of themselves all the time, not to be so obsessed with their identity and their preferences and who they are, but rather to really focus on what they can give, on who they want to become, on what they want to contribute, on how they can make others feel. And I think that the focus outward is going to be very protective for them in terms of mental health. This is something that I could make a whole other video about. So let me know below, what was the most interesting point for you here? Did you agree? Did you disagree? As long as you're respectful, I'd love to hear your feedback. And I want to encourage you to keep on living that high fam life. Make sure that you are on the studio waitlist so you can join me and I can coach you on exactly how to implement all of the tools and ideas that I share publicly. Go to highfam.com/studio for more info. See you next time.